Today's episode of Market Talk is brought to you by Growmark FS. Keeping up on the latest in ag is a challenge, to say the least, but there are experts nearby ready to help. You'll find them at your local FS. You can trust them to bring you customized agronomic, grain, and energy solutions born of the latest thinking. That's because FS specialists receive continuous training that keeps them current on the latest trends, practices, and technologies. So you'll get local expertise that's both exceptional and up to date. Visit fssystem.com to learn how FS is bringing you what's next. And joining us now here on the show for the first time as we get an update on the South American crop situation, Brazil and Argentina. Pleased to have with us here today a new guest, a new voice on the show. Pedro Danecca, founder and partner at MD Commodities, is with us here today. Pedro, great to have you on the show with us, sir. Welcome in. I hope you're doing well.
Thanks for having me, Jesse. It's a pleasure being here with you guys, man.
Hey, let's jump right in, Pedro. I know we have plenty to talk about and cover here today. Looking at now, we have USDA numbers that have come out. We have the Rosario Grain Exchange numbers, Buenos Aires numbers, everything out in front of us here. Really looking at the situation in South America. I know we hear a lot about the issues in Argentina, yet Brazil looking fairly good still. So let's just start overall assessment of the numbers that we've seen. Do you agree with those numbers, especially maybe starting Argentina? Are we seeing these issues down there, and do those numbers correctly reflect the issues that we are or aren't seeing in Argentina right now?
Absolutely. Listen, well, just to start out, a very good friend of mine, we were talking markets. This was Thursday night, or actually Wednesday night. And he actually told me, Pedro, the Argentinian weather is the Brazilian farmer's best friend, meaning the situation that's happening in Argentina. So starting from that point, to answer your question directly, the issues are serious. I mean, unfortunately, Argentina is now going on a third year of very challenging conditions. Now, we saw the Rosario Exchange come out with 37 million metric tons. One thing that we must put in perspective, the Rosario Exchange is made up mostly of producers. Producers are going to want prices to go up. So the Rosario Exchange is known for being a little bit pessimistic, exaggerating a little bit on their estimates. Okay, so do we believe the crop is 37 million metric tons today? No, we believe the crop is much closer to, say, 39 to 42 million metric tons, especially with the rains that have arrived here in the last couple of weeks, especially in the last week or so, and forecasts are relatively favorable for a decent part of Argentina. Now, that being said, USDA came out with that 45 number. We believe there's still room to the downside. So the USDA was cautious, and we understand that's a step-by-step approach that the USDA chose to take. So we're going to see another reduction on a future USDA report. I don't know if it's going to be on the February report or the March report, but we believe the Argentina crop, it's going to finish somewhere around 40 million metric tons. If that number is 38, if that number is 42, weather for the next 45 days are going to tell us. Because you got to remember, they are just now finishing planting. So a lot of the early planted soybeans, those are a mess. And a lot of those producers might not even replant. You're going to have some area that's not going to be replanted. So you're going to go from a potential of 50 million metric tons, 44 million metric tons last year, to call it, let's just use a 40 million metric ton number today. Okay, that's a good working number. But then there's a point that I need to make for you guys that are listening in and tuning in. Guys, last year Argentina was 44. This year, let's just say they're going to be 40. And if you want to be, let's go even further down. Let's use the Rosario Exchange as 37. If we use that number, that's a reduction of 7 million metric tons in production compared to last year with Argentina. Brazil, on the other hand, with the rains arriving in Rio Grande do Sul, which is the third largest producing state in Brazil, and it's the southernmost state, and it's the state that starts their planting the latest. So they have a very similar cycle to Uruguay and Argentina. Okay, so they're just now finishing planting, and the rains have arrived in a very timely manner after a few dry weeks over there. The Brazil crop is now consolidating somewhere around 150 million metric tons, Jesse. If that number is going to be 148, if that number is going to be 154, we're going to need another 30 to 45 days to really understand what the potential is. But the point is, the crop is going to be consolidated around 150 million metric tons. That's 23 million metric tons higher than last year, right? So think about it. Should we really be seeing at $15 beans when Argentina is losing 7? Okay, I get it. But the world's largest exporter by far, being Brazil, is going to gain 23 million metric tons, Jesse. So it's the market right now is not necessarily trading on fundamentals. You know, everybody wants to talk about, meal business and oil business coming to the U.S. Guys, it's not as clear cut as that. Argentina is already importing some Brazilian beans. Argentina is going to crush. And if at the end, these rains that are now arriving settles the crop down around 40, 42 million metric tons, 41 million metric tons, they're going to get plenty to crush. Now, Argentina has issues of their own, okay, Jesse? So, unfortunately, we have some political, economic issues there as well. But the bottom line here is that we seem to be pretty rich valued right here, you know, with meal where it's at, with beans where it's at, considering that Brazil is about to literally flood the market with soybeans.
So, yeah, I think $15 beans in the US, I know that's been this psychological area that we've just been, you know, bumping up against, and finally broke through after the USDA report to it. But to me, it sounds like we're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, so to speak, when these Brazilian supplies, this big crop comes online. So it would seem like the long-term potential here with futures in the US is going to be to the downside, Pedro. It just depends on when it happens, possibly.
It does, Jesse, and I catch some flack sometimes. Oh, Pedro, you're a perma bear, and I said, no, it's not that I'm a perma bear. It's my main clients are producers, like the vast majority. We have some funds, you know, some guys in the industry, but the majority of our clients are producers here in Brazil specifically, and our job is to manage their risk. And when we see fundamentals that we're seeing, even though the market is operating outside of those fundamentals, and by the way, they can keep operating outside of those fundamentals for much longer. Right? We're not sitting here telling them that, hey, beans cannot go to 16. We're simply saying, guys, listen, we don't have the supply and demand story to go to $16. Maybe we go for other reasons, Jesse, but it's not going to be because of a supply and demand story. So we need to understand that. And then how do we manage risk? And when we look in the second half of this year, Jesse, I want to say something right now. I don't know if the listeners are going to like what I'm about to say. But listen, with Brazil flooding the market right now with 150 million metric tons of beans, that means that Brazil is going to export close to 95 million metric tons, up from 77 last year. That's 18 million metric tons in gains, okay, in exports alone, which means that U.S. exports are going to suffer. So we believe we saw the lowest carry-out number for the U.S. for 22-23, and we believe 23-24. If all of a sudden we have an El Nino, everybody's talking about El Nino right by summer. El Nino usually, historically, means pretty decent crops in the U.S. And if the crops are decent in the U.S., even if we don't get a growth in soybean area, we could easily be looking at $11 beans November 23 in the second half of this year. Easily, right? So and again, guys, you know that funds, when they participate, they exaggerate prices on the upside, but they also exaggerate prices on the downside. And we all know that. And so what happens all of a sudden if these funds, you know, inflation is coming down? We believe inflation has stopped. So the inflation trade all of a sudden is dead in the second half of this year. They lose their spark towards commodities, and these funds decide to pile on shorts if the weather contributes. There's a lot of ifs that need to happen until that time. But I think we need to consider those ifs. It just seems to me that everybody's sort of caught numb to these prices right now, and they believe that, hey, you know what? $15, $14 is the new base, and we're just going to keep going up from here. We don't have the demand for that. We simply don't have the demand for that. We're producing a lot more than we are consuming, right? And people, but China's going to buy more. Guys, China has been stuck buying between 82 and 100 million metric tons importing since 2016, Jesse, right? And so go back and look what the world used to produce in 2016. We're producing a lot more. So look, the bottom line here, your point is well taken, and I agree. I think we need to at least consider a scenario where second half of 23, we see much, much lower prices. Could we see higher prices? Yes. But in our view, it's not going to be due to demand. It would be due to some kind of weather issue in the United States.
A lot of ifs, like you said, a lot of things to just keep in mind here as we move forward the next couple of weeks and months ahead. Let's talk corn a little bit as you look at the corn conditions currently in South America, and then also think about the safrita crop that is going to be coming up as well. What are your thoughts in this corn market as things stand right now, Pedro?
Pretty similar story, Jesse, and we need to make a point. I hear a lot of folks saying this. Actually, I started in July on Twitter at PhD Chicago. I started posting some data, and I said, look, at the time, the USDA was estimating corn exports for 22-23 around 2.3 billion bushels. And I made a very good point back then. I said, guys, please be careful. Corn exports are going to be 300 to 400 million bushels below where the USDA is. And the reason I said that is because Brazil produced a very good safrinha, and Brazil and Argentina had the most competitive corn in the second half of 22. Well, sure enough, that's exactly what has happened. And we believe corn exports are going to end 22-23 in the U.S. somewhere between 1.8 and 1.9 billion bushels. Now, I hear a lot of folks saying, well, but if safrinha doesn't go well in Brazil, the U.S. is going to sell more. I agree partially. The U.S. is going to sell more for 23-24, not for 22-23. Because even if Brazil has an issue with safrinha, Brazil is still going to harvest the safrinha around June, July. And so you have a very small window for U.S. exports to really catch up on the old crop slot. So an issue with safrinha crop in Brazil, if it does happen, means more optimistic exports for 23-24 for the U.S., but not necessarily for 22-23. So that's a point I wanted to make on exports. And regarding, the corn production, USDA is at 125, 126 right now for safrinha, not for safrinha, for total corn production in Brazil. We do not argue with that number at all. We think that's a pretty reasonable number. The range should be somewhere between 123 and 130 right now. There is a potential for it to be a little bit higher than 130 for a total crop, but we're going to need a lot of help from the weather, not just during the development of the crop, but also now during harvest of soybeans and planting of corn that's taking place already in Brazil. So, Argentina is going to have a big issue with their corn crop. Corn crop that could be easily 55, 60 million metric tons is probably going to be somewhere between 40 and 45. But again, you got to remember that's still 40 to 45 million metric tons in the market from an origin that's cheaper than the United States and cheaper than Brazil, right? So again, competition for corn exports is very, very tough out there. We believe the U.S. is going to pick up better numbers here in the next few months, right? Because Brazil shifts the key to soybeans. But it doesn't mean that Brazil is going to altogether stop. And one more point, Brazil has already started shipping corn to China from the deal that was signed last year. And we said it last year. It wasn't going to be impactful for 22, but it's definitely going to be impactful from 2023 going forward. And that means lost exports by the United States.
Well, and that shifting of the deck chair, so to speak, I know the Brazil-China situation, as you just mentioned, that has been talked about quite a bit. I noticed a report as well, and maybe you've heard this too, maybe not, about some Brazil corn maybe going to Mexico, which the U.S.-Mexico issues right now over GMO corn. I wonder if that could become more of a story as well to watch in the markets, Pedro.
That's a great point, Jesse. That's a great point. And absolutely it could. Again, the market always finds a way. The market is going to find the most efficient route, the cheapest, most efficient way to get business. And that's the beauty of capitalism, right? And so when we get to that point, we got to understand that now over 50% of Brazilian corn exports get out of Brazil through the northern arcs, through the very northern point of Brazil. And that northern arc has developed tremendously over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, Brazil used to export very little corn, and of the corn that was exported, less than a fourth was exported through the northern arc. Now we're looking at over half of corn exported. And by the way, we really believe that Brazil within the next year or two is going to surpass the United States in corn exports as well. And guys, I want to make something clear. I love the United States. I live in the United States. My wife's American. My kids are born there. The United States is home for me as well. I don't say the things I'm saying, to dog United States agriculture or anything like that. No, much to the contrary. I believe that if I do a good job being as transparent as possible with the U.S. farmer, letting them understand what the landscape looks like, they're going to be much more in tune and ready to manage their risk much more appropriately than they would be if they don't understand what's happening in South America, specifically in Brazil.
And that's a great point you make there. And before I let you go, Pedro, any final thoughts, anything else you want to reiterate before we run out of time today?
No, sir. I think this has been a great chat, Jesse. Thanks for having me on. I think we're touching a lot of great points here. Just stay tuned, guys, and understand that the Uber high prices, what that happened in 2000, especially starting the second half of 2020, 21, and 22. They might not be here to stay for much longer unless we have a weather issue. And if we have good production of safrinha, all of a sudden decent production in the U.S., second half of this year, corn prices and bean prices could look a lot different than they look right now. And I mean that to the downside. Unfortunately, but if you are ready, if the producer's ready and manage their risk, they're going to be just fine.
A lot of things to consider. We appreciate the insight. Founder and partner, MD Commodities, Pedro Daneka. Thanks for joining us. We'll get you back on the show again real soon, sir. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.